First of all, I want to thank Henry for having me. It's an honor to be a part of the Thursday night feature. I was not expecting it. I just want to let you know that this portion is pre-recorded due to my work schedule. I will be live during the Q&A portion of this live stream, so if you have any questions for me, please write them down. I would be more than happy to answer them. Now, I tried to go through this section unscripted, and I ended up talking for a very long time as I waited for my loaves to be done, and my phone stopped recording for one. Two, I became very unhinged, and also I have an ADHD brain, so I was just all over the place, and having a little bit of an outline, a little bit of a structure actually keeps me organized a little bit. So a little bit about myself. My name is Becca, and I am a professional classical pianist working in the ballet world as a company class pianist. I work for some pretty big names in the ballet world. I'm not going to go into them here. I'm also a teacher and a production musical director for our local arts high school here in Orange County, California. And I'm also an adjunct college lecturer for the dance department at one of our local colleges here. I currently have a cottage license. It's going on my second year, actually. Yeah, it's going on my second year. Little Sparrow Sourdough. You can follow me on Instagram if you're not already at Little Sparrow Sourdough. I mostly sell to my colleagues and friends, and I get some referrals for custom orders because I do a lot of sourdough art. Last year, when I started my cottage license, I was baking about 2 loaves a weekend, and that escalated to 16 loaves in a weekend. But most importantly, I use my bread as bribery for my students. So I would be like, all right, for bread points, who can tell me what is an enharmonic? And the kids are very motivated to answer my questions. I also dangle a grilled cheese party at the end of the semester for them, and it works out so well. Something about bread. So I was a recent guest on Jim Serpico's podcast. Shout out to Jim. It's called Bread for the People. In the podcast, you get a glimpse of my ADHD brain. We covered a lot of stuff, like a recent trip to the vet, to which I'm still paying off that bill. Venmo me. How I got into sourdough and sourdough art, my life as a working musician, having type 2 diabetes and how I manage that and still eat carbs. So I'm going to do my best not to mention the things that I talked about there, so you can actually go listen to Jim's podcast if you haven't already. It's called Bread for the People, and the episode is called Daring to be Becca Wong. My recent bragging rights, I got 3rd place in the sourdough category at the OC Fair, Orange County Fair. They said the reason why I didn't get 1st was because my loaf wasn't salty enough, but I used a 2% ratio, so, you know, again, it's purely subjective, and apparently the judge had about 250 entries of baked goods that she had to go through, and there was only one judge, so I would think by the time you get to my loaf, I don't know how she judges things, but by the time she got to my loaf, I'm pretty sure it was already, you know, her taste buds were probably very fatigued by then. So anyway, now most of the comments that I get when I post a picture of my loaves, my stencil loaves in this group, are people asking me how I do it. So today I'm actually going to show you how I stencil my loaves. But first I actually want to show you my board and how I organize my bakes in my tiny cottage bakery, my 16 loaves on a good weekend. Not so many during the summer. other than having to bake off a bunch of loaves to pay for my dog's vet bills. So I'm gonna show you my board over here real quick. So if you have any questions about that, again, ask me at the end of this stream. Okay, so here is my board. I've got the baker's percentage, my logo. Again, follow me, Little Sparrow Sourdough. And these are pretty much all my formulations on the board, so I don't have to keep looking it up and I don't have to keep doing the math. It's just right there. And these tiny little parentheses, I haven't erased those yet, but my last 50-pound bag of flour, the gluten was just a little too low, so I had to increase the hydration on that, or no, sorry, decrease the hydration, or I increased the flour, and those were my just small adjustments. These here are just the weight of the vessels that I use when I do my bulk proof. And here is actually my scoreboard. Get it? Scoreboard. These are my different Wire Monkey Loms, and I always tally off the side that I use. That way I can keep track of how dull they are getting. I usually get to about 10 before I switch. Now here are the 2 loaves that I stenciled in a late night baking session, because musicians are night owls and this is the time that we thrive. Before I go over that, I do want to go over some of the tools that I do use. In stenciling, I first have a Lazy Susan, nothing fancy, just a little Lazy Susan mechanism and a cutting board. And I use this kind of parchment paper and I just cut it in half. I usually just fold it in half and rip it. If you're fancy, some people have bread mats. Those work really well too. I have a brush to brush off the excess flour. You're going to need a lom. I have a few of these, as you can already tell, and obviously stenciled. So what we're going to do today is we're going to do the googly eyes. This one is quite popular. A lot of people request for this. Whoops. We're gonna be doing the googly eyes. And then we're going to be doing a gecko, and I'm going to show you just the different materials that you can use for stenciling. So here I have this nice loaf. It's been in the freezer for quite some time. As you can see, it's pretty stiff. This is actually how I want it. So the first thing that I'm actually going to do is I'm going to take a brush and brush off the excess rice flour. Oh, that's right. You also need rice flour. I forgot about that part. See, this is why I should have should have made a script, but whatever. Whatever, it is what it is. So as you can see, this loaf isn't very even. It's fine. It's fine. So what I normally try to do is I kind of look at the loaf to see how I want to position the googly eyes. And I know it's not very even, but I think it should be fine. I think I'm going to do it on this side. Okay, so here's my stencil. And this is reusable. I cut this out of, it's called window cling mylar. No, just kidding. Cancel that. It's window cling vinyl. And I just use a Cricut. And what I like about the vinyl is, as you can see, this is very flexible. And I can lay this on the bread very, very easily. And it comes up with these very clean images, and that's why I like using vinyl. So now that the loaf is clean, I'm going to actually use a spray bottle, and I'm going to spray it down. Some people like it damp. I actually get mine pretty shiny. I say, don't baptize it, but get it pretty wet. You see how shiny that is? So once you get it this shiny, let's see, I think I want to do an eye roll again. One of those things I wish Facebook had was the eye roll reaction button, right? So this is kind of my coping mechanism. This is my way of, this is kind of my eye roll. So I'm gonna stick that on there. Lay it on there like so. The reason why I like using the wood pulp for stenciling is because it forms a pretty tough skin, and I find that with stenciling, it works really well with stenciling. I'm not a fan of scoring with the wood pulp, but I like using it for stenciling. So now that I've laid down the stencil, I'm gonna take a damp paper towel and I'm just going to dab off the excess water. So that's pretty dabbed. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to dust this with some rice flour. I get this rice flour from the Asian store. It is a Thai brand. I find that this is it's milled very finely, so the image comes out very, very, very sharp. So if you want contrast on your loaf, if you are making any kind of bread art, I believe that the rice flour is the way to go. All right, so from here, see how I didn't dust this part? So you want to make sure that it's well dusted, especially where your image is. And then the rest, I guess, you can kind of, I guess I didn't really, there we go. Did I get it all? I think that's good. Let's get some over here. Yes, you are going to lose a lot of rice flour. It's just one of those things that you will have to deal with. All right, so now that I have rice flour on top of this stencil, I usually go from the middle and out. And you just gently take your finger and you just kind of go over the image, making sure that every surface around that is covered. And then the rest of this, I'm just going to brush off. Usually I just take the rice flour and I just throw it in the compost. It soaks up some of the moisture in my food waste bin. So, okay. So there's my eye roll. He's so cute. Isn't he cute? Look at that. He's so cute. All right. And now I'm gonna take the brush. I'm gonna brush off this excess, all the excess flour over here, because we don't want that in the oven. And with this, I'm gonna take a skewer and I'm gonna draw like a little frown with the skewer. I always use the skewer first so that it's a guide, because once you take a lom to it and once you cut it, it's done. So I'm going to carefully trace that. There we go. As you can see, he's so cute. All right, lastly, I'm gonna make the functional score. Again, I draw a line first. And then before I do this, this is always the last thing that I do before it goes in the oven. Last thing you have to do is always, golden rule of stenciling. Always remove the stencil before it goes in the oven. You're going to have some plastic melted mess on your hands if you stick it in the oven. That's not cool. So I'm actually going to use the same skewer. Let's go this way. You just take up a little bit of the stencil and just gently peel it off. There we go. And then the other one. All right. And then finally, I'm going to take my goose lom, and I usually go much flatter. I go beyond a 45-degree angle and I just go for it. So, and what's great is you have a frown this direction, and then if you turn around, he's smiling. Isn't that great? It's so cute. All right, I'm gonna stick this in the oven for 23 minutes. Yes, I said 23 minutes. Okay, so the first loaf is in the oven. I am going to go get the second loaf, and I am going to use a different material of stencil this time. I am going to use here this gecko. I don't know if you can see that in the light. Again, I cut this with a Cricut, and this material here is Formula Mylar. You can get all of this on Amazon, and it's just a large sheet. You can actually hand cut these, and what's great about the Formula Mylar is you can actually put the Mylar in on top of an image and take a Sharpie and trace it, and then take an X-Acto knife and cut it if you don't have a Cricut. That's one of the ways you can actually make a stencil. But I find that Formula Mylar and also the window cling vinyl works really well on bread because it has a little bit of flexibility to it. Some of the stencils that you purchase on Amazon are just a little too stiff and it doesn't lay on the bread well. So I find that Formula Mylar works really well. So my next loaf, I'm gonna do a gecko. And what I'm gonna do is a mixture of stenciling and scoring at the same time. And I actually did this gecko back last summer, and it was my first video on Instagram that exploded. Okay, so here is a loaf. Again, this has been in the freezer for quite some time. I would say probably an hour and a half. I know people are like, what? Trust me, it just buys me more time when it's been in the freezer for that long. Again, do what works for you, and you're going to find that an hour and a half may not be good for you, but it works just fine for me. All right, so here I used one of the traditional Bannetons, not the wood pulp one, and it is lined with cotton. And again, I brush off the excess rice flour. The reason why I do this first is I find that the rice flour that is already on the loaf has moisture on it, and we actually don't want that with the stencil. So I always use new rice flour for stenciling. So again, I'm going to take the spray bottle and I'm going to spray it down. See how it's nice and shiny? Now I'm going to take the gecko and I'm going to lay it down. And you'll notice too, if you decide to use Mylar, it is a little stiffer than the window cling vinyl. I'm actually gonna dry off some of this. You are going to notice that it's a little stiffer. So it is a little bit more finicky. It doesn't give you a sharper image like the window cling. So again, I'm going to dab off the excess water. I'm actually going through my fingers over the loaf to ensure that that I got the water from underneath the stencil. So the reason why you want to wet your loaf before putting it on is so that you ensure that the stencil sticks on the loaf. So now that the stencil's on there, I'm gonna take some rice flour again and we're gonna dust this real good. Now this one, I think I did this last year from a challenge that was happening on Instagram, and I think they were doing a, I think it was tropical sourdough, and they were challenging us to do a tropical theme. And so a lot of people did the hibiscus flowers, people did the plumeria. I think there were some flamingos in there. Very creative. And I didn't see a gecko, so I decided, you know what, I can't draw, but I can make a stencil. So that was what happened. If you listen to Jim Serpico's podcast, I was recently on that. I talk about how I conned my husband into getting me a Cricut for his business, and he still uses it for his business, but it sits in my office, so it's technically his, but really it's mine. You guys know that. You guys know the game. Okay, now that I've dusted it, I am going to brush off this excess rice flour off the parchment just to keep the area clean. And what I'm gonna do with this one, my inspiration was seeing all the geckos in Hawaii, and how they just cling onto everything. And I thought about, what if I did a gecko just sitting on top of Hawaiian tapestry? So that was how I came up with this idea. And what I'm gonna do now, I'm gonna make, this is just embroidery floss, nothing fancy. I'm gonna do a few lines. And you're going to be able to see that I kept the stencil on there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to score with the stencil over. And what's great about using Mylar is that it's a little, because it is tougher than window cling, I can actually score right over the stencil and it's not going to damage the stencil. Okay. So what I'm gonna do, let's see if I remember what I did. I think I did a zigzag. So I'm gonna do a zigzag design right here. And I just kind of pretend that I can score over the gecko. Continue. So while I do this part, because since I'm doing, I don't have to give you a play-by-play exactly of what I'm doing because you're watching it happen. Let me tell you a little bit about how I got into sourdough art. A friend of mine, now I skipped through all of the making your own sourdough starter. I am pretty busy. I work as a professional musician. I work at the local ballet training school here in Orange County. And I also work as a teacher. So I am pretty busy. My teaching gig literally takes up, as you know, if any of you are teachers out there, takes up 90% of my mental capacity because teaching. And my other gig, my main gig, is working as a ballet pianist for the local ballet school, and it is a very rewarding job. I have a dance background, as you may not be able to tell from my horrible dance technique from, you know, the random dance video, if you saw that video where I'm just, you know, goofing off doing a late night bake like this. It is, what time is it right now? It is 11:15 here in Orange County right now. So everyone on the East Coast is sleeping. Okay, so I'm gonna do a wheat stock on this one. Now, one of the things I like to do with the wheat stock is I go from the stem out and I kind of use this brush stroke motion where I put pressure towards the stem and then I pull it away. And I can already tell that some of this rice flour is getting absorbed into the bread because it's been super humid here. I don't know if it's humid where you are. It's uncomfortably humid here. So I'm gonna try and work a little faster because I can feel the heat in this kitchen. All right, and then let's see here. I'm gonna take the duller side of the blade. I'm gonna draw some decorative lines. So I always try to be careful with these lines that they don't go too deep. Again, you see that this the llama is going right over the stencil, and it's not gonna hurt the stencil. And that's the advantage of using Mylar instead of the window cling. The window cling is pretty fragile, but it makes very clean, crisp images. So I think with this one, instead of doing a big functional score, I'm going to do a 5-minute score. What's a 5-minute score, you ask? It's when I put this loaf in the oven for 5 minutes and then I pull it back out and then I make 2 big functional scores. So let's see, I've got some empty space here and some empty space here. So I think I'll just do a quick wheat stock. And I'm kind of just doing it to the curvature of the bread. All right. And I've got some scissors here, and I'm going to just make these little spikes. There's something oddly satisfying about cutting into dough. I don't know what it is. I think we do this because it's just fun. Okay, but yes, this is the loaf. I remember doing this last summer, and I remember uploading the video, and I went to bed, and then I woke up and I got all these notifications, and I had over 20,000 hits within, you know, less than 24 hours, which is crazy to me. I just don't understand how the algorithm works. All right, so obviously I can't cut through that. That's where the gecko is. So you just kind of keep snipping and you'll feel it. Okay, so lastly, I'm going to pull this gecko off. Remember, golden rule, do not bake with the stencil, ever, ever. You're going to have a melted plastic mess on your hand. So again, you go from one end, you kind of gently go through with your skewer and just go underneath. All right, so there we go. There's the gecko, and I'm gonna stick that in the combo cooker for 5 minutes, and I'm gonna pull it back out and do a functional score probably over here, just so that it would expand. All right. All right, so there's 5 minutes right there. I think I'm gonna do 2. I'll do one right here. And I'm gonna do another one right here. Oh wait, I'm gonna cut right over the tail. Sorry, tail. Oh, speaking of gecko tails, this happened today. My rescue puppy found a giant lizard, caught it in her mouth. The lizard broke off his tail and she swallowed the tail. Yeah, she's not sorry. We'll do it again. All right, I'm gonna stick this back in the oven. And I'll check it at 20 minutes. Hey Siri, set timer for 20 minutes.
20 minutes, starting now.
Ooh, look at that. Yes, queen. Oh, he's so cute. Look at him. He's so cute. And then you can actually turn this way and he's got a giant mouth. I don't know if you can see that. So there's the googly eyes. Look at the belly. So I'm gonna keep this one for myself. I'm not gonna give this to anyone or sell it because I don't know, he's so cute. And listen, I don't know if you can hear that. Love it. All right, here is my gecko loaf. As you can see, it came out a little darker than I would like, but I think most people like it this dark. I don't like it this dark. It cuts into the roof of my mouth. So that is the 2 5-minute scores that I did. As you can see, these have cooled off now. And that's what it looks like. And it's supposed to be a gecko on tapestry. Yep. But it's still pretty crusty, listen. But yeah, so there's my gecko loaf. All right, this concludes the pre-recorded portion of the live stream. I look forward to answering your questions if you have any. Remember, work hard, be kind, and great things will happen. I was still muted. Thank you so much for taking the time out and watching this live stream. As you can see, I am not in my kitchen. I'm actually in the green room at the Performing Arts Center where I work. I'm here in the Q&A section right now. So if you guys have any questions for me, I would love to answer them. They could be, all right, Becca, how did you first get started with bread stenciling and what inspired you? I think I actually saw someone on Instagram do stenciling, and her name is Emerald Green. She used to be a bread artist with Proof Bread, which is a sourdough bakery in Mesa, Arizona, and she does a lot of stenciling and she designs her own bread, but she talks about how she will make sketches and do stenciling. That was kind of how I got into it, except I don't draw. So a lot of the designs that I do, I find off the internet for free. And I upload it into my Cricut and I remove the background and I cut mylar or vinyl with it. And that was kind of how I got into stenciling. And what's great is I can do pretty much
any customized loaf that you want me to do. So I've done a lot of birthday loaves. People are like, can you, it's my dad's birthday. Can you put happy birthday on it? I have also done, I don't know if you've seen some of my previous posts. I'm a huge Schitt's Creek fan. So I did a whole series of Schitt's Creek loaves where I did like lick rust, eat glass. And I remember, some of the comments were very interesting. There was one where I was like, these are beautiful loaves, except, it has such vile messages on it. And I'm like, it's from a show. So, but it's great. When you are able to do stenciling work, you can actually do a lot of customized things. You can put smart ass comments on there. You can put cuss words on there, which I've done in the past. But for, custom loaves, I don't put those on Instagram. What is your favorite design to stencil onto your bread? Can you walk us through the process? I don't really have a favorite design. I usually do designs kind of off the cuff of, whatever I'm currently inspired by. Sometimes I go by the Instagram challenges. And when there is a challenge, such as the gecko one that was from a year ago, and I just I kind of said it in my demo, how you kind of go through. Um, I saw a lot of different people's plumeria. Some people did like a bikini, which is super cute, and I didn't see a gecko. I saw a sea turtle, so I also did a sea turtle, but actually like shaped 2 loaves of sourdough into like an actual sea turtle. And I didn't see a gecko, and I decided to do a gecko kind of clinging onto Hawaiian tapestry. And as you see, I actually did that. I decided to recreate it, and I did this last Wednesday, and that was right at the peak of the Maui fire. So I did have a moment of sadness when I was doing the loaf. I was not intending to do the loaf in the midst of this fire, but a really good thing actually happened from that. I didn't feel right selling that gecko loaf to anybody. So I actually gave it away. And when that person tried to give me money for it, I just told her, please don't pay me, but please use the cost of that money and actually donate it to Maui charities and donate it to them because they need that more than I do. So it was just interesting timing. How does your background as a musician influence your approach to baking and stenciling? I am a classical pianist, and one of the things about being a classical pianist is the intricacy and the details that you have to put in, all the tiny little small articulations. So I've always been very focused on the smallest details, and I somehow kind of translate that into bread. So when I'm making these scores and I'm making these stenciling, I make sure the smallest details are refined, and I try to clean up the edges, and I make sure that every brush stroke, or in this case, score with the wheat stalk or whatever I'm doing, that it has the same amount of depth in it. And that's also one of the reasons why I stick it in the freezer for much longer than recommended, because it does give me a tougher surface, so I can actually feel how deep that I'm going when I'm doing my scoring and my stenciling. But that's kind of how I go into it. How do you source or create the stencil you use in your bread art? I again, I find images off the internet. I use a Cricut. I do subscribe to the Cricut creative, I forgot what they call it, the creative space or whatever. And you can actually find a lot of images through Cricut. And you just pick one that is for stenciling, or like one layer, and you put it into the design space. That's what it's called. And you take measurements and then you stick it through the Cricut. That's the fastest way to do it. I don't deal with X-Acto knives and hand cut my own stencil. Reason being is that I am a pianist. I need my fingers. These are my literal money makers. So I do my best to save time where I can. So I use my Cricut, and that's how I source my stencil. So you can actually, you can get the images for free, whatever is in public domain off Google. If you just Google the images, and you can actually find a lot of really great images in Cricut. And not sponsored. Cricut is not paying me to say this. I just think it's a great. It's a great thing. What's the biggest mistake to avoid when starting with bread stenciling? As I said in the demo, and I think I said it twice in the demo, and I think I'll say it 3 more times. Do not bake with a stencil. Do not bake with a stencil. Do not bake with a stencil. Always remove the stencil before baking. I think I made that mistake once where I left a tiny little piece of mylar into in the bread that I forgot to take off because I couldn't see it. That's the one advantage if you use vinyl instead of mylar. And it ended up getting fused into the bread, and I ended up having to, I wasn't sure. So I cut that whole section away. I couldn't give it away, couldn't sell it. I ended up saving it for myself. So always remove the stencil before baking. And before I answer this next question, one of the questions I usually get in the comments is, can you use paper for stenciling? Absolutely, yes. Except only dampen the loaf. Don't spray it down like the way I do. Just dampen it enough for the paper to come down, due to the fact that paper does dissolve in water. So when you remove the stencil, it will break apart. So if you dampen it, it's just easier to remove. So you can absolutely use paper. If you don't want to get a Cricut, if you don't want to go fancy, you can always use paper. So what was that question? How old is baking straight from the freezer affect your baking time and texture, if at all? It does not affect texture. And it does not affect baking time. I, again, like my loaves a little lighter. I sell them semi-par bake. So I semi-par bake? No, a little over par bake. What I do is I bake them for 23 minutes. Usually what happens is I sell those loaves off to someone. It sits in their freezer for whenever they are ready to bake it for their party or a special occasion. And so it doesn't affect texture at all when I freeze the loaf. Again, I don't go over 2 hours. So an hour and a half is the max in freezing the loaf. And all that does is just hardens the outside. So it buys me more time to do my designs. Someone here said, I am also ADHD. How do you keep track of everything? I frequently forget ingredients and add them in the wrong order. Oh, yes. I see that here. I usually have everything on the board. I don't know if you saw that in the beginning part of my demo, but I have a huge blackboard in my kitchen with all the measurements, depending on how many orders I have to do. So if I have 6 loaves, all the measurements are there, and they're in the order of the way I add them in. When I do my autolyse, I don't hold out salt. I actually just throw the salt right in with the autolyse. I have not seen a difference in texture in rice, just throwing salt in from the get-go. So I always have that order. So I go from bread flour, wheat, salt, water, and then starter at the very end. And then I have ratios of how much to put in. And if I have it in front of me, it's easier to, for me to keep track. Could you share some beginner-friendly stenciling techniques and tools to get started? I think the easiest one to do is take a piece of paper. Here, I've got some notebook paper here. I don't have scissors on me, but easiest thing is make a heart. Make a heart, cut around that, and take a loaf and just spray it down. Don't baptize it if you're using paper, and just lay the heart on there. Dust some rice flour on it and then brush it off, and gently remove the stencil, and you can score around it. I think that's probably the easiest thing to do is start with a heart. Again, you don't have to go fancy like I do with the Cricut. You can actually use an X-Acto knife. Another great way, if you saw in the demo, is taking the Mylar and laying on top of an image that you want and tracing it with a Sharpie and then cutting around it. That's also another good way to make a stencil. Let's see, I see here, what is the most challenging stencil have you done so far? Probably the Friendsgiving loaf. I have a Friendsgiving loaf that I had posted. It's pinned to my top video in my Instagram. A customer wanted Friendsgiving on a boule, not a petard. And I asked her, do you mind if I break off the letter? So it's like Friends Giving. And she said, no, one word, and I want a fall leaf. So she was very specific about it. And luckily, I was able to make the lettering just small enough. And I think for me, the most challenging part when you're doing lettering is knowing where the dot of the I went. I have lost that so many times where I'm like, I can't find the dot. It's a clear piece of Mylar. It's somewhere on the plate. It's not anywhere. So most of the time now when I do lettering, I just take a skewer and I just stab the dot on the I. That's probably one of the most challenging things. But yeah, I'm really happy that I was able to get that loaf out. How do you balance the science of bread baking with the artistic expression of stenciling? That's a good question. I don't really, maybe it's because I am a musician first and I am not a science person at all. I don't really think about the science of bread baking. Um, if you see some of my beginners loaves, I was baking blobs and I was scoring blobs. And what's great about scoring and doing bread art is that you don't have to worry about an ear popping up. You don't have to worry about the belly. If you score a wheat stalk on there, it's still going to come up. So I really don't think about the science side. I just kind of have a formula that works for me. Obviously, in the wintertime, I bulk rice for 6 hours in my kitchen. And in the summertime, it's been around 4 to 5 hours. And then I throw it in the fridge. My golden rule for me is I don't leave my loaf to cold proof for more than 48 hours. I think 48 hours was kind of pushing it. And I really don't think about the science side of bread baking. I just know what works for me. And I always try to tell people whatever works for me may not work for you, because it all depends on your environment. What inspired the name Little Sparrow? Just curious. Little Sparrow is a song by Dolly Parton. And around the time I came up with the name, I actually had a show dog, a retired show dog named Jojo. And I only had her for 2 years, and she died very suddenly, very traumatically, in my arms at home. I was not expecting it at all. And her name was, sorry, I'm getting a little emotional. Her name was actually Jolene, which is, again, another Dolly song. And Jojo's mother's name was Dolly. That was how she got the name Jolene. And when it came time for me to name my cottage license, because they said it needs a name, I was like, well, I don't want Jojo sourdough. And so I kind of thought, well, what other song from Dolly kind of sounds like Jolene? And I came up with Little Sparrow, because Jolene is in a minor key, and Little Sparrow is also in a minor key. And so that was kind of how I came up with Little Sparrow. And yeah, I didn't want my own name on there. I just wanted something cute and adorable and Little Sparrow. And so because she's over the Rainbow Bridge now, she's no longer JoJo or Jolene. She's now the Little Sparrow that watches over me. Sorry. Yes. Any other questions? But yes, work hard, be kind, and great things will happen. That has been my philosophy. I'm very grateful to have the job that I have as a professional musician. Not a lot of people can say they can make a living out of being a pianist or being a musician, and I have been able to do it, and I've been very fortunate, and I think it has a lot to do with the fact that I get along with a lot of people. I show up, I do my thing, I smile, and I leave. It's as simple as that. You just have to be kind to people and just say yes to opportunities. And if you listen to um, the podcast, I mentioned in there that this last year, in terms of anything bread, is to say yes, 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 yes to it. So that's why I decided, yes, I would love to do this live stream and do a demo of what I do in my kitchen, and kind of show you a little glimpse of my personality and my weird sense of humor. And yeah, yeah. And I hope you guys have more questions for me. If not, I don't know. Anybody else? Oh, I should also share that 2025 is kind of my exit plan. I would like to leave teaching altogether. I would like to, I want to continue to play professionally. But I would like to leave the teaching side in 2025, and perhaps knock on, that's not wood, that's concrete. I don't know what it is. Knock on wood that I would love to actually take a Little Sparrow to a farmer's market booth somewhere and actually walk away from teaching. So we'll see what happens. And, follow me on Instagram and see my journey. I don't always post pretty things on my Instagram, as I try to show people that not everyone's perfect, and it's okay to make funny loaves. And also remember that your loaves, your sourdough, or whatever you're making doesn't have to have that ear. It doesn't have to have that perfect crumb. It doesn't have to be perfect, because at the end of the day, your bread is homemade and it's going to be delicious, whether you give it away or whether you keep it or sell it. Just remember that, don't be so hard on yourself. A lot of times we show off these beautiful loaves on Instagram, like, look at this belly and look at this ear. And at the end of the day, it's bread. It's bread. It's meant to be eaten. And people always tell me, I feel so bad cutting into your loaves because they're so pretty. And I said, that's the best part, is just taking the loaf and just taking a knife to it and just destroying it. That's the best part, because looking at it is one thing. At the end of the day, it has to taste good. So it doesn't have to be perfect. So yeah, preach, sister. Haha. Anyone else have questions for me? If not, I think we're good. No? Okay, what do you think, Henry? I think we're good. Or do I need to stall out for 5 more minutes? Thank you for a wonderful presentation, for answering the questions. You have been very helpful. Yay, I'm glad. And if you have any additional questions, feel free to ask me either in the the Baking Great Bread at Home page, or go hop on my Instagram. You can DM me there. You can DM me here on Facebook. I don't check the Facebook Messenger much, but I do respond to my Instagram. I try to respond to people either under comments or under the DMs. If you are hopping on late, don't worry. I believe this is going to be available to watch later. So if you have any questions or if you want any recap, you can always watch this again. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you. Thank you. It's great to see people and, responding to it. It's very encouraging. So thank you. Thank you. All right. Anybody else? No, I feel like I love when you say it's bread. Yes, it is. It's just bread. Remember, it's just bread. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect. All right. Okay. I think that concludes this live stream. Thank you again so much in joining us. Please follow me on Instagram. I would love to connect with you. Ask me questions, reach out if you want to. And if you are in the Orange County, California area, hit me up. I would love to say hi, have coffee, come to one of my shows. I'm doing Into the Woods at Orange County School of the Arts. I'll be playing the show. So, but yes, be kind and work hard. And thank you so much for having me. Have a good one.